Welcome to part 2 of our lecture on our creative magical roots. This section, we had the Ice Age art in the first half, and this section is about Malta and the amazing sites that are there. Very, very ancient sites. So wanted to introduce you to this before I put you back into the recording. I love this photograph, which is from uh, the Heritage Malta people, and it is the sun rising at the equinox at Imnidra, which was a known astronomical site. I think they all were to some degree, but this one was clearly an observatory, probably amongst other things, but definitely um, functioned as an observatory as well. And we'll get into that a little more later, but remarkable site. And obviously this is a beautiful view on the morning of the equinox. This is the spring equinox, I believe, since it was the entrance. And then this next slide is how ancient Malta is, and it's so very ancient. And as I said, some of the people are very firm believers that it's part of Atlantis. And obviously no one has any proof or disproof. Um, I think we all have possibly even a slightly different concept of what Atlantis was, but it's definitely very vivid in our conscious, our unconscious, our visions, our fantasies, and our dreams, and could quite possibly be a reality in our past. I once again am showing the 40,000-year-old swans from Malta just to give you, it's 40 to 20,000 years old. I don't think it was more specific than that. From there to show you how ancient the culture is there. And then once again, Wendy's, Ashley's drawing where she discovered that one of the ancient caves in France had the image of Cygnus the Swan, one of our primary northern constellations. And in this particular picture, you'll see quite a few repeats of the work of this gentleman. This is Francis Xavier Aloisio, who was one of our guides when I went to Malta. And this was a photograph he took at the summer solstice celebration at Gigantia on the island of Gozo. And this is a young woman performing one of the many songs dedicated to the beautiful ancient sites of Malta. So next we'll get into the how old Malta actually is. And this gives you a little feeling. I mean, when we get numbers, sometimes it's a little hard to grasp how old something is. But we know that the Scorpio period is 6200 to 4100 BCE. And that was some time before some of our, what we think of as the most ancient buildings in the world. These are freestanding buildings, and they are quite old. 4100 to 2600 BCE is the Temple period, and that was when Gigantia was built on the island of Gozo, and the Great Pyramid in Egypt was actually built after that, according to our current dating, and then Stonehenge. So then we have the Bronze Age period very well represented also in on Malta and Gozo. And what's fascinating about that to me, of course, this was the Minoan culture, where the Palace of Knossos was at around 1700 BCE. Another Atlantis image is the island of Santorini, which is Thera. If you're in Greece, they call it Thera. And at that time, it was called Kalisti, meaning most beautiful, at the time that it exploded. But in any case, they were very respectful and used the old sites, I think, honoring them. And expanding somewhat, yes, but definitely in touch with those sites. And at this point, we'll get back to the recording of the actual event and give you a little sense of um, what the rest of the lecture was and how we proceed from there. And there'll be a little addendum at the end where I will explain some things that I've found since June 10th when I did this actual presentation.
This next thing I have I thought was really fascinating because it was the solar stone that was at the hypogeum, which we'll get into more. For those of you who looked in the back, we can probably look. I have a feeling I may finish early, which, you know, you can go back and look at the 2 books on the hypogeum that I have. Those were published by the Archaeological Society there in Malta, the historical, archaeological group there. And then there's one on Tarjin, the little sister or brother site, as you would call it. And I guess I should give a little foundation beyond, I think obviously you already know about the feeling that they were Atlantis, but the 2 major islands, the 2 big ones in the nation of Malta are Malta and Gozo. And they very distinctly, Malta has a masculine energy and Gozo a feminine energy, and they consider one the feminine island and one the masculine island. So when we start going through this, you'll just realize that this is considered the masculine thing, but obviously there were a lot of goddess sites on the masculine island. But when you get to, and it's very dynamic, and even today, everybody has guns there. They love shooting things, it's very Mars-like in its energy, and it's very dynamic and very active. And then you go to Gozo, and it's gentle and pastoral, and there are 3 hills, like the triple goddess. There are 3 hills, and now, of course, there are Catholic cathedrals at the top of each one. It's a very Catholic country, and they are quite beautiful. So you get the feeling of the difference. So when I go to the sites, I'll describe them. I'll make it clear which is which. But the solar stone is from the hypogeum, which is on Malta, the underground site. You'll notice there are 8 divisions there. And Jill pointed out that there's one by Sedona, right? That looks very much like that. And I think there are some others. I think like medicine wheels, they call them, more the solar symbols in our own native culture, just like that one of the Lakota that had the same swans that, or swan that we saw that were sacred to the people. And of course, shamanic arts are big with Native Americans. So, but the original Babylonian, or at least as far as we know, the oldest constellations are the ones that aren't in the shaded areas up here. And you'll see that Scorpio and Ophiuchus, the shaman, were already, that was one of the oldest ones. There's sort of a pan-like creature that's down below the ecliptic. And then you can see Leo the lion was already there. What we call Ursa Major, or the Big Dipper, as people often refer to it, was a wagon or a funeral cart, depending on which view you have of it. Then, of course, Taurus is there. And, and I'm sorry, Hydra, the water snake, was down below the lion, and that's why, if you look at the Leo symbol, that's the snake, actually, that is the symbol of Leo, which someone explained to me that Leo has a snake and a lion as part of its energy and expression. And, like I said, we're looking over Taurus over here, and then Aquarius up there. He was called the Great One, and this was when it was already it was a very masculine-dominated culture in Babylon, except that the women the women were one thing, and that was Venus. Even the moon was considered masculine, but Venus was the most powerful creature in the sky. If she blessed, meaning if you were in the beams and the light of Venus, because she was so bright, any planet that was there, the constellation that was illuminated by those, was blessed by Venus. And then it was auspicious. So you didn't get anywhere without Venus blessing you. So now they called they called her a lot of things, Inanna, Ishtar. So I'm just showing that there were the 4, and then you had 8, and there were actually 18 constellations with the Babylonians, because it was the path of the moon, which can travel off. So could Venus. She actually goes off the ecliptic too. So the 2 women in our sky can actually travel off the ecliptic and go explore other constellations, which I find kind of fascinating. So, of course, slowly but surely, the asteroids have become the 4 major Greek goddesses who have different roles are becoming minor planets, all of them, slowly but surely. Ceres is a minor planet, Vesta has become a minor planet. I think it won't be long until Pallas Athena and Juno, also Hera, I'm using the Greek and Roman terms, become minor planets because they were the first discovered and they're pretty big. So pretty soon we'll have all the women in the sky. So I think we're seeing a little bit of, and with the age of Aquarius and a very long process of dawning, I think we're having equality, really. It's not going to be a dominant feminine energy or a dominant masculine energy. We have to learn to balance it and have an equal sense within each human being and the way we function as a society. So, as I preach here, but I thought that was kind of interesting since that's what seems to be coming up for us these days. And Atlanta seemed to be one of those cultures that got about as cocky as we did, by the mythology, and thought it could control everything. And funny how those things work. Mother Earth, if you get a little out of alignment with her, she can get rid of you and that quick, which is basically what she did with most of the people of Atlantis in the mythology. And it's something we really should think about, whether we're still viable here and if we are reverently taking care of our mother planet that gives us everything. Well, the sun too, obviously, it gives us things. But the idea is we don't survive without her. So I just found it interesting that we seem to be facing a similar time of the myth of Atlantis, and this is all coming up with all of these different cultures, so, including Malta. So anyway, these are some of the examples there that I thought I've never seen. I love the spirals that you find around, particularly Newgrange. Everything is spirals in Newgrange. And this is the Hypogeum and Tarjan. And it's the roses were part of the symbolic entrance to Tarjan. And look at how, can you see them very well? Unfortunately, because they're a relief, they're a little hard to see, but these gorgeous spirals, the way they are designed there at Tarjan, just a really beautiful sight. I honestly don't know if this was part of the Minoan creation or whether it was an earlier creation, but I love the way they recreate that wonderful nautilus and spiral ones that the shells have. This is the ceiling of the Hypogeum, and this was one of the rooms where the oracle was at the Hypogeum, and they have these beautiful swirls. And this is also more of the spirals from Hajarim, which is also on Malta. These are all on Malta. And you can also look at it as horns, even maybe a ram's or a bull's horns there. So I'll get a little more into the Hypogeum and what I experienced there. One of the gentlemen who was leading us, and I hope they speak when we go back to Malta next year. I said I'm encouraging everybody to come. We have a wonderful group. He did paintings of all the major sites. His name is Francis Xavier Aloisio, And he wrote a book that was in your handouts that was Island of Dreams about Malta. And it's his concept of it being, not his concept, but the general sense among the natives that it was the mountains that survived with Atlantis and carries the wisdom. And that was his painting of the Hypogeum, and that's where the dreaming goddess came from. And here is one of the main chambers, but look how perfectly that was all carved out of stone beneath there. And my experience going through this, we should have a few more here. See all these chambers? They have that very much in Greece too. They were places where people would go to dream, you know, for healing energy and for, you know, for the goddess to speak to them and guide them. And this was the Hypogeum, which also has those, and it's actually older, I think, or at least it's hard to tell how old the ones are in Greece, but they weren't the later classical period by any means. They were the older period. But it's so magical in there. And there was a big, below some of the dreaming chambers, there was this big pit down. I mean, it's not a big pit, but it was somewhere between 18 inches and 3 feet deep. And they were saying that they didn't know what that was for. You know, people had to jump down to get the nice. It was full of water. You know, it was purifying. I mean, I was in there, and I swear, you know, this is the intuitive, and all I'm telling you is this is what I saw intuitively, was that these were dreaming chambers, and this was water at the bottom, and you walked across the water, you know, it wasn't that deep, purified yourself, and then went into the dreaming chambers. And the energy was visible in there as well. Here's the they had 7 steps down to one of the lower chambers, and that was very symbolic as well. And this is the lowest level of the dreaming chamber. You can sort of see that. It's pretty deep if you think about how far up that is. But it looks like the bottom was like 18 inches, and it's probably 3 feet total there. But that is what I saw, and then this was I considered it, I said, a sacred ritual chamber of initiation of vision, outpost of Atlantis and survivors thereof. That was what I was looking at, and I swear I stood in there, and you know, you're on these little walkways. You don't really, you can touch some of the stones, but it's pretty impressive there. And I could see 3 teachers in robes, and I could see them creating sort of and it was a brilliant green and a brilliant blue energy, and it looked like, the best I can describe it as, was electrical looking, and this was some sort of ritual graduation ceremony I was observing, and it was very profound. And so I think that's why Andrea sent me back, because I kept seeing these things, you know, that seemed to be great mysteries. Like I said, who knows? I mean, but what I was intuiting and the power in these places was just dumbfounding, and the beauty of them is so incredible. So, pretty impressive. The reason I'm bringing in the cart ruts here is because they clearly aren't cart ruts. No carts could make ruts that deep and still travel along there. And we were standing there, he said people, they go into the ocean. They go all the way down from these sacred sites and go down into the ocean. And apparently there are caves and things down there that actually, there was sort of an underground system that goes all the way to Sicily, which is essentially due north of Malta, Gozo. And I walked up, and it was, and I saw the light going through them. It was like, I said, these are energy channels. And I think it's not quite the electricity that we relate to today. I think they were electromagnetic, but I think they were human created, probably, from what I can gather. from what I'm reading, the chanting and the, whatever they were concentrating on, whatever knowledge they had, the wisdom that was imparted, they were actually creating this energy system. So, like I said, this is Debbie's intuitive thing. I'm just sharing it. I could be dead wrong. I certainly have no physical proof. I'm just saying that was my feeling there. It was that powerful when I went.
Did you have the feeling water was involved?
I think it must have been. And I think that's part of like a formula or whatever you would want to call that, because they did go into the water and then went under, and I think there was a replenishing under there, just like when you went through that process in the hypogeum chambers. It's a pretty actually intimate experience when you go down there. They only let